Madam Clerk.
Oral questions by members.
Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you very much, Honourable Speaker. And first, on behalf of the Official Opposition, I want to congratulate the Premier on her return to the Legislature. I'm sure it's a very, very proud day for her and her family. So my question is to the Premier, and I hope it's a question that we can find some agreement on. The government has chosen to deny funding to women's groups, to Aboriginal groups, to community groups in the downtown east side at the Missing Women's Inquiry. This in spite of the recommendation of Wally Opal, who has recommended that these groups be heard, that their voices be heard at the inquiry. Will the Premier intervene to overturn this decision and make sure those voices are heard at the inquiry?
The Premier of the Province of British Columbia.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Leader of the Opposition for his kind remarks to start off this very first question period since I've become Premier. It is indeed nice to be back, and I owe many thanks as well to the people of Vancouver Point Grey for supporting me and getting me here, and of course to all the folks sitting on this side of the House who've been holding down the fort while I haven't been here, including the Minister of Finance and Deputy Premier, who's done some full duties in these last couple of weeks. So I'm delighted to be here, and thank you very much to the member for the question. It is tragic what has happened on the downtown east side, and it continues to be tragic. What happens down there for women and children and men who struggle every day in what is certainly one of Canada's poorest postal codes. It has been a challenge for governments for decades to try and get our hands around the issues down there, try and wrestle them down, and make sure that it's a better place tomorrow than it has been in the past. This government called the inquiry in the first place and appointed Mr. Opal to head it up because we want to make sure that people's voices are heard. And we want to make sure that we get to the bottom of some of the problems down on the downtown east side and make sure that when we get to the bottom of those problems, we have a way to move forward. So I know the inquiry is committed to making sure that we can hear from as many voices as absolutely possible, because we want to make sure that the downtown east side is a better place, is a safer place, and is the kind of close-knit, healthy community that many of the rest of us have the good fortune to live in.
Leader of the Opposition has a supplemental.
Well, you know, Honourable Speaker, there's apparently funding for a large number of government lawyers. We've seen in previous matters, in particular in the BC Rail trial, that there's funding sometimes for government insiders, $6 million worth of funding in that case, for them to get access to justice. In this case, we're talking about the groups. And I want to quote the former Attorney General, who says these groups are closer to the facts at issue. Most of these groups were frontline lobbyists for public attention to the missing and murdered women, and ultimately for the establishment of a public inquiry. Now, the Attorney General says there's a line, and because of that line, these voices won't be heard at the inquiry. They won't be supported by the government. But I think clearly the government's line is in the wrong place. So what I'm asking the Premier to do is intervene and ensure that those groups that represent women on the downtown east side, are heard at this public inquiry.
Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the member for the question as well. Now, the member knows that the government is funding the families to be able to be heard at the Commission, and we are making sure that as many voices as possible are heard before that Commission. It seems to me to be our obligation to do that, and we're certainly living up to it, although it isn't required by law for us to do that. We want to make sure those voices are heard because, as I said, the issues facing women and children and men who live in the downtown east side are serious and they are urgent. And one of the things the government has done to try and address those issues and make sure that we really understand them, to make sure we have a roadmap to try and address them, is to appoint the Commission of Inquiry that Wally Opal is heading. There are many, many, many other things, though, that we can do. And among them are making it a little bit easier for all families to get ahead in this province. Make it a little bit easier for all those folks, many of whom are struggling at the bottom of the income scale, many of whom find themselves at the middle of the income scale, some of whom still find themselves at risk of homelessness. Make sure that they have a chance to get ahead. Putting families first is at the heart of what we are doing as a government. We want to make sure that families have a lighter burden across the board. It's a little bit easier every day for families to put food on the table for their children, no matter where they find themselves across the province, whether that's in Salmon Arm, whether it's in Prince Rupert, whether it's in Atlin, or whether it's in the downtown east side of the city of Vancouver.
Leader of the Opposition has a further supplemental.
Well, Honourable Speaker, putting families first isn't about words, it's about actions. In this case, the actions are $6 million in funding for the defendants in the BC Rail trial. $6 million, right? That's what it is. And to deny funding to the very groups that Wally Opal has said should be funded. What did he say? He said, Honourable Speaker, he said that the groups that he has given standing at the inquiry should not be denied participation because they have lack of funds, and this is precisely what the government is doing here. The voices who protected and defended women on the downtown east side are being denied access at this hearing. So why doesn't the Premier intervene, give the same status she's giving to government organizations at this inquiry, give the same treatment that the government gave to defendants in the BC Rail trial, and ensure that those voices are heard at this inquiry?
Premier.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks again to the member for the question. Now, the member knows, as I said, that the government is funding families. We, I believe, have a moral obligation to do that, even if we don't have a legal one. We certainly are. And we've expanded the terms of reference for the commission so that it's a study commission. They can hear from many other groups as well, so that it's a less formal inquiry, and the idea with that is to make sure that it's easier for people to be able to access the inquiry and make their voices heard. There are very specific issues in the downtown east side that we absolutely have to be thinking about. We have to make sure, as I said, that the route going forward is a lot better than the route going backward that we've seen in the past for people in the downtown east side. But we have to support families all across the province. We have to lighten the burden. That's why the minister responsible for BC Hydro is reviewing BC Hydro. That's why when ICBC decided that they were going to start ticketing people or giving people higher rates after they had one ticket, the Solicitor General stepped in. That's why the Minister for Transportation is having a look at BC ferries. And that's why we are lowering the HST by 2 points. We're going to make sure that every family in this province ends up ahead when it comes to taxes. And when you think about the total burden that government puts on families and want to help families get ahead all across the province, I'd sure rather be supporting a 10% tax than a 12% tax.
Victoria Beacon Hill.
Mr. Speaker, this is the government's own commissioner, appointed by the government, appointed by the government to manage a very serious issue of missing women across this province. The commissioner himself has recommended to government that these groups and organizations need to be funded in order to participate in this very serious inquiry. I heard the Attorney General, Mr. Speaker, say that it's about priorities, that we have to prioritize money. Well, it's very clear where the BC Liberals have made a priority. Their friends and insiders, Bessie Burke, got $6 million and nothing for the Missing Women's Inquiry. So my question is to the Premier. If the Premier wishes, through you, Mr. Speaker, to put families first, here is an opportunity. Fund the groups and organizations today.
The Premier of British Columbia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thanks to the member for her question. I'm very glad that the rumors of her imminent demise are turning out to be untrue. She's provided a great voice for women in British Columbia. We haven't always agreed on everything, but I'm delighted that she's continuing her seat in the legislature, continuing to take her seat in the legislature. As the Attorney General has said, Our government is deeply concerned about what's happened to the downtown east side. And that was why we appointed the Commission of Inquiry in the first place. That was why we took Justice Opal's advice and expanded the terms of reference so that it could be a study commission and hear from more people. And that's why we are providing funding for the families to be heard in this, so that they can be represented by lawyers, just like we did in the Braidwood inquiry. So the government is, I think, with all of these actions, demonstrating in this aspect, in this particular aspect, that we do really, I mean, this is an incredibly important issue. We have to make sure we get to the bottom of it. And we have to make sure that going forward, the downtown east side is a safer place in the future than it has been in the past. Our government remains deeply concerned about this, not just with respect to the work of this inquiry, but even further. We need to, as I said, look at the total burden on families overall. We need to make sure that low-income families in particular are doing better than they have been. That's why our government has provided a whole series of rebates and made it a whole lot easier to be able to support the burden of government when you're at low income now than it was about 10 years ago.
Here. The member has supplemental.
I do, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remind the Premier that we're talking about the Missing Women's Inquiry. And the Missing Women's Inquiry would not have happened if it wasn't for those 13 groups who stood up to this government to insist on having the inquiry. Mr. Speaker, these are groups and organizations who put time, who put energy, who put their own resources into making sure that inquiry was going to be there, in making sure that they would have a voice to try and do everything possible to ensure that these kinds of things don't happen again. And now, Mr. Speaker, when they're asking for funding to fully participate, this government has said no. So I ask my question again to the Premier. Why won't the Premier, why won't the BC Liberals support these groups and organizations, support the work that they've done to get the inquiry so they can fully participate?
Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the former Leader of the Opposition, many thanks again for the question. This government, although I was on the outside at the time, I'm reliably informed. And I remember this from my days in radio. The government said at the time that they would support an inquiry when the legal proceedings were complete. And the government kept their promise and has gone further, has accepted the recommendation of Commissioner Opal to expand the terms of reference to make it a study commission so that more people can be heard, and has gone and followed the example that was set in the Braidwood inquiry and made it possible for the families to be funded and be heard at the inquiry. I think those are very important steps to have taken, and it really reflects, more than anything, this government's deep concern about the conditions in the downtown east side. All of those missing and murdered women were lost to their families and to our communities in the most tragic way possible. It's incumbent on all of us, in every aspect, in every corner of our society in British Columbia, to care and to show that we care by doing something about it. And that's what this government has done.